Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're finally here to review Haswell E. Haswell, I mean, that's a name that we've not said for such a long time, but it's kind of just catching up with the bigger sockets. So we're here today to review the 5960X, which is Intel's new flagship 2011 V3 processor. It is Intel's first mainstream, or desktop I should say, and by desktop I mean it's not a server product, so their first desktop 8-core processor. It's 8 cores, it's got hyper-threading, so that means 16 threads. Now with the products that have been released around this previously, they would have been Xeon products, which meant that they had stock speeds on them. Whereas with this, it means we've got 8 cores, 16 threads, and overclocking as well. So the 5960X is the only, the top end one with the 8 cores. The 5930K is actually 6 cores and 12 threads. So kind of much the same as before, but with the newer stuff. But the reason why I was talking about server products as well is the 5960X is pretty much the 12-core Xeon product that's actually been out for a little while. Now this is quite a clever thing really, because underneath that PCB you will have those 4 extra cores as well, which is something I found quite, it's very interesting. They've just turned bits off. So essentially what we've got now is kind of a Xeon level product, but with overclocking. Now, this isn't something that goes into the Intel PDFs and stuff. This is just stuff that we've kind of, we've been finding out by, talking to vendors, talking to the reps, and all that kind of behind the scenes stuff. So it's not as new as we may have been made, to think. It's actually been, I've got 2 of the 12 core products in the loft now, and I certainly didn't realise that that was what we were going to be eventually getting brought down into the desktop market. But something else that's happened with Intel recently is when these Intel products used to get sent out previously, we would get sent a motherboard from Intel, and it was like an Intel branded product. Now Intel has stopped doing this now. They don't sell motherboards anymore, they don't get produced anymore. So we're going to be doing our testing on the Asus X99 Deluxe. Now anyone that was on Facebook that saw me recently talking about a product that I was seriously considering for when I do my Orca V2 build, this was the one that I was on about. Now before you get all panicky and stuff, this is the one that we're going to be basing our initial CPU review on. I will be, and you can have a look, go and look for the other videos, I will be doing a full review on the Rampage 5 Extreme. Yes, it's not a myth, they have one, it's here, it's in fact here. So this is another product that we're going to be doing shortly. And then once we've done a couple of the other branded stuff, we will go back and do a standalone review on the X99 Deluxe as well. It's just we have to have a product that we can do stuff on, right at the very beginning. So this was the one that I chose to base all my findings on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break in to look at some slides and stuff. There's going to be a lot of time spent talking about BIOS. There's a lot of the overclocking things that have not necessarily changed on this, but have evolved on this. Base clock overclocking's back. If you enable XMP, that's going to change your base clock. It's how they get up to that DDR4 thing. That's something I've not actually stressed about yet either, is we have got DDR4 memory. So there is a lot of things that we need to go through, and I'm going to try and do this in the best way that I can possible. But it's we've not got a lot of time. DHL did manage to keep hold of my processor for 6 days and not deliver it. So I am very short of time, but it will mean that there's going to be a lot of other reviews and stuff. Also, this is a very new product. It's also, with the motherboards, it's very new BIOSes. So as things evolve, I will come back and we will add, very specific reviews and stuff to it. So it's going to be one of those ones that you are going to need to keep an eye on the channel. If this is a product that you're either seriously interested in just from an enthusiast perspective, or a product that you're seriously interested in as a purchase perspective, I'm going to do as much as I can over the coming weeks and probably even months to make as many videos for you as possible. But today it's the first initial look at the 5960X using the Asus X99 Deluxe, which I have to say is probably one of the prettiest boards I've seen in a long time. But anyway, so we're going to move on, we're going to do that, get comfy, get your biscuits, get your big mug, get your refills ready. It's time for some Logan. Okay then, so we do have to show you some graphs. It's easy to show you stuff graphically. So if we see on the far left hand side there, we've got 2003, which we'll say is 11 years ago. Single core, 1.7 million transistors and 130 nanometer process. I actually said it right. Then 2005, that was our first dual core processor, 90 nanometer process. And if you think about it, 2005, first dual core, that was 9 years ago that we've got our first multi-cored processor. 2006, we had the first quad core 65 nanometer process, and those quad cores were insane money. That was really where the 800 to £1,000 products first started. In 2010, you move on, 32 nanometer process. That was the Core i7, the first 6 core, 12 threads, and like I said, the 32 nanometer process. 2014, big step. We've got the first 8 core with hyper-threading, so 8 cores, 16 threads. It's 22 nanometer process, and there's 2.6 billion transistors. And that's something that you do need to kind of remember here, peeps, is that you're not just talking about more cores with all of this stuff. You are actually talking about many, many more transistors as well. I mean, if you were to take the original one in that graph, and you can see 1.7 million transistors, if you were then to times that by 8, we can kind of say, we'll round it up to 2, times it by 8, 16 million transistors. If you were to take that technology, whereas if you look at the technology that we're dealing with nowadays, it's 2.6 billion transistors. And that's another thing that you kind of need to remember, is it's not just a megahertz upgrade, it's not just chucking on more cores, which is something that other companies tend to do. There's the technology gets refined, and you end up with a more overall package there. So it uses less power than the older ones. We've got more cores, more transistors. It should technically be hotter, draw more power, but it doesn't. It goes the opposite direction, and that's something that's testament for this, the Intel products. If we move on to the next, we actually get down to the nitty-gritty of stuff. You get to see that 2011 V3 socket, 8 core and 6 core options. It's the new Intel X99 chipset, and it says upgraded I/O capabilities. That basically means that you've got Pci Express, you've got M.2. It's still running on 40 lanes of PCI Express, as it says at the bottom. You can get up to, and that is the clear thing here, is up to 4 discrete graphics cards. The 4 graphics cards is the 8 core models. The 6 core model, which is the baby one at the bottom, you can only do 3. The 4th PCI Express lane then pretty much gets used predominantly for your M.2 and your Pci Express, just to kind of put that out there. But all the processors are fully unlocked, so you get to play with the overclocking, you get to play with and by overclocking I mean the base clock and your uncore and your multiplier. That's all, that's all unlocked for you. One thing I will say is that from the testing that we've been doing, the 5820 at the bottom is very much a speed bin product. You can't get the overclocks as high as we've been able to get on the X and the K, just to kind of put that out there. But that's also something that we're going to be looking at in depth later on. Right, so we've got another slide here. You can see that we got the 4-channel DDR4 2133 support. That's the bargain basement, the bottom one. 3 GHz base frequency, and then you're up to 3.5 GHz turbo. That doesn't mean when you load your applications up, it should run at 3.5 GHz, because it will adjust itself depending on how many cores are being used. What you will probably find is that if all of the cores are being used, you're going to be getting somewhere between 3.2 GHz and 3.3 GHz. So don't panic if you're not getting that 3.5. 20 megahertz of smart cache. It's got the turbo boost technology. That just means that kind of it can alternate the core speed. Hyper-threading. I love hyper-threading. It essentially just means that you've got your system will see twice as many cores as you actually have. And then the 5960X, as I said, is 40 PCI Express lanes. If you've got the 5820, you're going to have 28 though, just to, you know, put these numbers out there for you. If we then move on, it's just a quick one, and I actually find this kind of stuff quite interesting. Yes, the prices are in dollars, but that's all we ever get given. And this is the range at the moment. You can see that we've got the 4960K i5 at the bottom, 3.5 gigahertz, 4 cores, 4 threads, 16 PCI Express lanes in total. And then you move up to the 4790K. You can see that it's a 4 gigahertz base clock. It will actually sit at 4.4 on most boards, as it says there. 4 cores, 8 threads, 8 megabyte cache, 16 PCI Express lanes. Move up, and then you go into the 2011 socket. So we've got the 5820K. Base clock is 3.3. It says it turbos up to 3.6. 6 cores, 12 threads, 15 mega cache, but 28 lanes of PCI Express. Now that all gets split off between a lot of different things, but it does make a big difference when you're running mega, you know, a lot of graphics cards. It actually makes a difference with the boards as well. 140 watt TDP at the end, and they're saying $389. Move up the 5930K, 3.5 up to 3.7, 6 cores, 12 threads, but the 5930K does have those 40 PCI Express lanes. So the 5930 and the 5820 are both 6 cores. You have to go up to the 5960X, which is the granddaddy at $1,000, to get the 8 cores, 16 threads. You also get 16 mega cache and those 40 PCI Express lanes as well. They're all saying that they've got a 140 watt TDP, but I have to admit, for a 140 watt processor at stock, it's nowhere near as hot as the 140 watt TDP offerings that we were getting with the 8 core AMDs. And I'm not bashing on the AMDs before anyone says, I'm actually just saying, you know, the TDP that's registered there was the same as another processor from a different brand, yet at stock, these processors are significantly lower. These are a lot easier to cool. Now that could be the IHS upgrades that we've got this time, because they've put a lot of time into that. The clamp is better. The material on the top of the processor, the actual IHS itself is actually meant to be thinner, and we know that they're soldered on now as well. So that could, you know, mean that even though it's got that TDP, we know that it's going to be drawing that sort of power, that the temperatures still manage to stay lower. Moving on, it says new levels of breakaway performance. It's actually saying that the 4K video editing, which is obviously going to take any system a lot of time, is going to be up to 20% faster. But if you look underneath, it's putting the 5960X up against the 4960X. So this is Intel to Intel. So they're not putting this up against another manufacturer's processor. This is just how much of a boost you're going to get from going from the older generation 2011 up to the newer generation. So we've got 4K video editing is 20%, 3D video rendering is up to 32%, and then the game physics and AI is up to 14%. And you can see underneath, that's Adobe Premiere Pro, then you've got Cinebench, which is the R15 version, and then you've got 3D Mark Firestrike at the end. These are all things that you can go and test yourself, or you know, to kind of, you know, if you're going lucky to go from one to another, obviously we have, and it's going to be, if you click through to the link, it will be in the main OC 3D review for you to go and look at. Another thing that they're going on about, and this again is, this is going 5960X, sorry, and then you've got the one underneath, you've got the 4960X and the 4790K. You've got 6 cores and 4 cores here. And it's saying that, you know, it can be up to 34% faster than 6 cores, or up to 69% faster than 4 cores. So 34% faster than the 4960X, 69% faster than the 4790K. Very confusing, but anyway, there's those results there for you as well. Then when we go in, this is just a quick splash to show you how things are connected. You've got the graphics lanes, PCI Express graphics lanes feed into the CPU. Then you've got the memory. You can also see that we've got USB 3 ports and USB 2 ports on the left hand side. Your Intel Mac, you've got the the little chip is your X99, and that's how they're all kind of interconnected. I find this kind of thing quite interesting, just to learn, you know, which parts connect to what part of your board and how they all kind of talk to each other. Now, one thing I did want to say is you can get the an Intel cooling solution, and it's basically just an Asus unit that's boxed up with an Intel logo and stuff on it. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a bad product or anything, but if you're spending out the money to get an Intel processor and you're watching one of my videos, I would almost be disappointed if you stumped for one of these. And like I said, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. There's nothing particularly great about it as well. There are so many other really good branded products out there. And I suppose, you know, from a snob's point of view, and I call myself a snob here because I do like aesthetics. If you're just going to be running a desktop workstation or something, then, you know, completely fine, don't care what it looks at. But these things aren't exactly very quiet either. The fan profiles on them are terrible. So once you start changing fans and all that kind of thing, you're turning yourself into an enthusiast. So why don't you just go out and get yourself, you know, there's many products out there depending on, you know, the fitment and stuff. You've got NZXT coolers, you've got the Corsair coolers, you've got the Noctua air coolers. There's many kind of like air cooling brands, but you've got the all-in-one cooling brands as well. And I've actually started to favour the all-in-one coolers now, especially if you step up to something like the H105 that we'll be using in our testing, or the H100i, something like that, maybe the X61 from NZXT. You can have not only a cool system, but a quiet system as well. And that's one of the things that I think with nowadays, with technology moving forward, it doesn't matter how fast your system is, if it's screaming like a screaming banshee by the side of you and it sounds like a helicopter trying to take off on your desk, you've kind of missed the point, really. And the only time you should ever be able to get away with that type of thing is if you are actually deaf and you can't hear it. Okay then peeps, so just a quick look at the actual CPU itself, because it has taken on a little bit of an aesthetic transformation as well. You can see the IHS has got these little feet that stick out now, because this is the 5960X and this is actually a 3930K, but the 4930Ks look just like this as well. This is kind of the IHS, or the top of the CPU that we are used to seeing, and if anything, this almost has taken on kind of an AMD kind of look to the way that the edges are so absolutely dead straight and curved, you know what I mean? So the sides are perfectly go down. This has been used, by the way. In fact, if I move this out of the way, it'll have half a job of being able to focus. Hopefully, there we go. So you can see that's thermal paste around the outside, because like I said, this has just come out of a working board. I can't film everything straight away. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the way that looks in the actual motherboard itself. But if I just show you, that's all the pins on the other side. People now are expecting me, or the regulars are now expecting me to start saying about, ooh, look at the focus. But yes, so if I get a motherboard. So here we've got the board that we're going to be using. It's, as you're already aware, the X99 Deluxe. Now, again, just to show you quickly, there's the other CPU. And basically, when it comes down, it locks into place. Now, if you've not seen an X99, or sorry, a 2011 socket before, then you're probably not going to understand. It's got like a two-stage lock to it. And I've obviously done, right, so we need to make sure that the pins are up. And when it goes down, you can see here, if I zoom you in, you can see here that it's actually sat on that IHS now. Now with the older one it didn't, but it's sat on that, and it's the same at the other end. Look, you can see that the clamp actually grabs hold of that IHS now. Now it is soldered on, but whether that helps push it on a little bit harder, we don't know. Whether it's just to give it a nice grab and it's not touching the silicon so much, again, we don't really know, but it's kind of, it gives you a nice grab on there. And then where it's got a two-stage latch, what you do is you push this one down first, and it can be quite tight as well. There's a hell of a lot of tension on this. And then we do the second one, which goes on the inside, and that's it. That's how it goes in, that's it fitted. And again, if we zoom in now with my hands out of the way, you can see that straight edge on the side of that IHS a lot more, and that part of it does remind me of the way that the AMD IHSs look. You've still got that little, I call them a ventilation hole. I don't know whether they are or not, But some people have kind of said to me that they thought this the tabs on the outside were bigger because of the extra cores underneath, but the actual size of the cores themselves are tiny. The reason why the CPU is this big is because of the pins themselves. The actual silicon in the middle, the actual die is very, very small in the middle, so they're not very big units. And the size of the processor depends on the 2011 or 2011 pins that are underneath that. But anyway, that's our up close look at the CPU and the socket. Let's now move on to the test rig. Okay then peeps, so onto the test rig itself. We've got it in our motherboard test rig, and the test setup that we used for the CPU, now that I can't get the door off, is the Asus X99 Deluxe. It's the new black and white one. We will be doing a full review on the board later on, but Intel don't make the motherboards anymore, so we have to choose a board to do our first batch of tests on. What we will do is we'll break off and we'll do other reviews, like we're going to be doing the Rampage review next. We will come back and do more coverage dedicated onto the X99 Deluxe. It's probably my own personal favourite, but anyway, we've got a GTX 780 Ti in there. We have 16GB of Corsair Dominator, what am I on about, LPX. It's their kind of new low profile memory. It's 2800 megahertz out the box at 1.2 volts. We've got a Corsair H105 in there. This is going to be critical later on when we start doing our temperature testing. There are two SP120 LED fans on that for cooling as well. We've got a, I'll just move the camera quickly. We have a SanDisk Extreme Pro solid state drive in the bottom. I used that just because it was a big one. It was the spare drive that I had around, so I decided I'd give this a crack. We'll be doing a dedicated review on this as well, but for the time being, this is the one that I'm going to be using for these reviews. It's one of the quickest solid state drives out there as well, so that's all well and good. And then obviously the case is the Corsair Air 540, and it all, you know, all looks kind of nice. I like the kind of understatedness. We've got the gunmetal grey cables in here that we used before, and it does kind of go together. I suppose only the green bit really sticks out too much. But that's our test rig for the remainder of the video. Now what we're going to do is move on to look at some of the BIOS features. Now yes, this is going to be based around the Asus, but it will pan out throughout the other motherboard ranges as well. So your MSIs and your Gigabytes, it will look slightly different. It may have slightly different wording, but the end result will be pretty much the same. And this is obviously all the CPU specific stuff that we're going to have a look quickly at now. Okay then, so this may seem like a strange place to start, but I thought it'd be good to start with temperature testing. Now we have already done this, but the point in the temperature testing is we can still see the stock stuff on the right hand side, but we've just kind of got it done in one screen already. One thing I will say though is when we do start the overclocking, the OCCT, this bit here, isn't reading things properly yet. So we've left it all at stock. It's completely stock in the BIOS. We've got the H105 on it, which is a relatively high-end cooler, but you know, it's like I said, it's a good place for us to start. And if we zoom in, and I'll have to move the camera so that we can see like this, what we can see is if you scan down through this, 46 degrees on one core is our highest. And then also if we slide across over here, what we can see is the voltage is dancing around a bit, because like I said, it is running at stock. But the you can see it goes down to 1200 megahertz, but each time this kind of updates, it flicks between the two, which is another reason why I've done it, because it's quite handy to see it changing. But the stock voltage when it's under load is 1.05 volts. Now we've got that. We've got our memory speed down, our North Bridge frequency down here. Our memory speed, the DRAM's here. If you times that by 2, you get 2133. That's the way it works. Sorry, I didn't show you. Go down here, let times 1066 times 2, 2133. Lovely. We're getting, this is 1200 megahertz. North Bridge frequency. That again, it's just at stock. You can change all that stuff in the BIOS. But anyway, so we've done that. We've got the stock stuff. Obviously, we know that it's a 3 gigahertz standard. You can see R1 is regularly here running at 3.3. It will go up to 3.5 as well, but you need to remember they stagger the cores. You don't get all the cores going up that high. So the 3.3 is your kind of average, kind of dancing processor mark. What we're going to do now is, you've seen the voltage up here, 1.05 volts. We're going to call that our stock voltage. And now we're going to head into the BIOS. Okay, Pete. So quickly into the BIOS. You can see up here the core voltage and everything. And it is at stock. We have to hit F7 to go into the way we would be used to seeing stuff laid out. Still got that nice graphical interface. The 2011 stuff, some of them were pretty basic, but it's kind of caught up with the Z68. The Z87 and the Z97, I should say. But when we go across, we can see everything is on auto. We've not changed anything. You get a lot of information on this side: frequency for the memory, the voltage for the memory, capacity. We've got the voltages down here for the board. So we've got the 12 volts, 3.3 volts, the 5 volts. More importantly, up here we've got the core frequency, the memory frequency, and then the cache frequency of 3000 megahertz. Now, one thing I will say is the when you enable XMP on these boards, especially with the quicker memory, the BCLK does play a big part in it. With the Z87 and the Z97 stuff, we've got so used to that 100 base clock, and you don't really touch it unless you're messing around with your memory. And even then, you know, we kind of generally say just don't bother, because it does make stuff unstable. It's very different with 2011, and even more so with this one. I did play with the BCLK with the 4960X previously, and the 3860 and the 3870, because there were was it the 39? I can't even remember the names now. There's been so many Intel processors recently, I'm completely number blind to them. But anyway, so and with those, you could play with the base clock if you wanted to push your memory up a little bit more, but you could get most of the memory frequencies from the 100 BCLK. So with the 100 BCLK, you get like your 2133 and your 2400. That's the tie-ins for it. But once you get past the 2600 megahertz stuff on this, especially like when you go onto XMP, so this is what we're going to do. Look, we're just going to go in, we're going to go to XMP, and then it's going to set it for us. And then what it does is, as you can see, we've now got the CPU strappers on 125 megahertz, but the actual base clock frequency down here is 127.3. By doing that, the cache goes up to 3437. Turbo mode frequency has gone up a little bit, but this will sit at 3.5 now. It won't actually, it won't dance between. But we have got the DRAM frequency there. So with these, it does play a much, much bigger part. But just to confuse matters, if we go back to auto, but we actually need to put it on manual. What we can do is we can go down here. In fact, I'm going to F5 it. So we've got, right, so we go to the overclock tuner, we go to manual, there we go, right, CPU strap. When we go in there, you can see we've got 100, 125 and 167. I've played around with this significantly, to the point where it will boot 167 and just boot into Windows. It's actually quite fine. I've had mine running at a 175 megahertz. But what we'll do, before I start showing you screenshots and we start talking about them and all that kind of stuff, what we'll do is we'll go down to look at the rest of it. You've got the normal core ratio that you can set. So for argument's sake, you can set it to, we'll say, I'm going to put 28 in just so you can see it. And it does all those for you because we've got select synced cores. That's all kind of normal, as you would expect. The cache ratio, this is your, the way it was worded before was the uncore. Now the thing is where we've got DDR4 memory now, so there's a lot more memory bandwidth that we can utilise. The CPU cache ratio actually plays quite a better part in it. So one of the things I would say is if you're going to be running high memory, don't just ignore this stuff, because you can tickle this a little bit more and actually help get the throughput through for your memory there. We've got the DRAM frequency ratios here. We can have the 100 or 133, so you can play around with the differences there. DRAM frequency, as you can see, this is now tied in to the strap that we had above, because each time you change the base clock, these will change. So I'm just going to show you quickly, just to show this. You can see it starts at 1332 here, but if we go back up, if we were to change this to 125, which essentially changes our base clock frequency, if we then go down to the memory, DRAM frequency, there we go, we can see we've got 1000, and you can see it goes up in those steps. So this is another thing with the 2011 X99 stuff. If you change the base clock, that's going to change the memory as well. It's very much like the 1366 days back, and you can spend a lot of time tweaking and balancing everything. So essentially you've got your DRAM frequency, you've got your base clock frequency, you've got your uncore or your cache frequency that you can all play with. There's lots of bits and bobs in there that you can tweak, and it's going to take, especially a beginner, it's going to take you a long time to learn what all these things do, and it's pretty, I would say, you know, get your pen and paper out and start learning all this stuff. It's not something for a total noob, really. You do to get the most from it. If you're going to tweak it, it's definitely an enthusiast product. It's the type of thing that makes me excited. Your DRAM in there, it's just your timing control. And I know we're making this more about the board, but we're going down towards the voltages now because, like I said, we are trying to review the CPU. We've got the core voltage and the cache voltage. Your cache voltage is again linked into your memory, and if you're running high memory speeds or high uncore speeds, this cache voltage is going to be critical for you. System agent voltage, that's all kind of stuff that we're used to. Your DRAM voltages, and then we've got our PCIe voltages and the I/O voltage. But something that I've been tweaking a lot, if I try and find it, I think it's a little bit further up. There we go. CPU input voltage. This basically, the best way I can explain it is this voltage comes in and then it gets separated out between everything else. So you can kind of nudge this up a bit and can actually have an impact on stabilising everything else. They've locked it down a little bit more with X99 and the way the voltages get dealt with on the boards, but that's one that you need to keep an eye on as well. So this is all the CPU kind of stuff in the BIOS. But now what we're going to do, I'm going to take you to the desktop now, because I've got a lot of screenshots from the testing that I was doing when I was playing with the CPU on the Deluxe board, so I can show you some of the stuff that I managed to achieve. Okay then, so moving on to a quick look at the memory. When you enable the XMP profile obviously boosts the base clock up. It then makes the all of the settings and stuff adjust. So essentially, we've got 3.5 megahertz. It pretty much overclocks the CPU as well, because rather than it dancing around, we get stock 3.5 megahertz. It changes the base clock, changes the multiplier. All of the boards will probably put the voltages up as well. Now, obviously, going from a 0.05 voltage to up to a 1.2 voltage is then going to make a difference. But one thing we can show you is you can see here that we've gone up. It's not quite, it should be 1400, because 1400 times 2, 2800, but it's, you know, it's kind of there and thereabouts. You can see that we're running at almost a 3.4 gigahertz Northbridge frequency, which is your uncore. You can see our settings down here, 16, 18, 18, 36. That's our our static timings there. So what I did is I run another set of thermal tests. So it runs for 30 minutes. You can see all the voltages and everything down here. But then across on this side, essentially the hottest core that we had at this point was 65 degrees. And that's predominantly because of the voltage. So don't worry about like your overclocks and stuff, because a lot of people kind of say, oh, I've got a 4.6 gigahertz overclock, what temp should I be getting? That's not the way it should be. Most of your temperatures will come because of the voltage that you put through it, because that's where the heat comes from. So we can see we've had quite a jump in temperatures there. So but then again, it's quite a jump in voltage as well. But still, when you consider that we've now got a processor running 2800 megahertz memory, 3.5 gigahertz with 8 cores, and the kind of performance that you're going to see later on, and yet we're still pumping out temperatures kind of, you know, with an average cooler, because this is obviously quite a good one, we'd be looking at about 70 degrees. With our one, like I said, most of them are around the 60 degree mark. We've just got one that kind of tips up. The package temperature, which is the socket, was 65 degrees as well. If you can't see the numbers on this, blow it up into full screen on your computer, and then put it in 1080p mode, and you should be able to see the numbers easier. If not, click the link to go to the Overclock 3D website, and you can see everything there. We've got all the screenshots and stuff posted so that you can get a good look. So right, on to this point. This was where I started playing with the Uncore. So we've pretty much left the CPU at the memory rating that we had previous. So it's pretty much an XMP mode, and I've started to play with the cache ratio. And I then managed to get the cache ratio up to just shy of 3.8 gigahertz. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it does put a lot of stress onto the CPU. I bumped the CPU voltage up a little bit to 1.25, and we then run another set of thermal tests. Because the whole point is this is a new CPU. We don't know how this reacts to heat. We don't know what levels, sometimes you can have a certain part of the CPU that makes the temperatures rocket. So what we've been doing is we've run a certain set of tests. Now on the website, what we've done is we've run stock tests, we've run memory tests, we've run Uncore tests, and then we've run several different overclock tests as well to compare it, just so that we can lay all these details out and actually start to learn what part of the CPU you need to concentrate on, what parts of the CPU you don't need to concentrate on. Because this is such a new product, Intel don't really give you much guidance about stuff, so you pretty much have to just put the time in, run in the benchmarks, and then come to your own conclusions. One of the problems that we have had as well is that 3D Mark is broken at the moment. We can't run it on the 2011 stuff, so we've been using all of our other ones, but these are just our thermal tests at the moment. And as you can see, voltage again's gone up. Now we can see, especially with that Uncore up as well, you can see that our temperatures have taken quite a spike. But now we've got our hottest cores gone up to about 70 degrees in 2 places. Most of them are around the 65 degrees mark. So things are heading northwards now. And don't forget, we are still running a pretty good cooler. Okay, so moving on to kind of normal sort of style overclocks. I went back to 100 base clock, and then I worked my way up because you need to try and see the multiplier limits. Now with the multiplier limits, and we've still got 1.25 volts, mine was hitting like a wall really at about 4.4 megahertz. Sorry, 4.4 gigahertz. So 44 multiplier, 100 bus. We run temperatures again, and at 1.25, you can see now that we're up to the kind of like 78 mark now. So we're heading up towards that 80 degrees marker. I don't really like pushing much further past that, but we got that there. So that's that point. So we now know 4.4 gigahertz. But now I actually need to go back again and start thinking about base clock. So I was just playing around. Essentially with the playing around, I went and hit that 167 base clock strap, and I managed to get it to boot in fine. We weren't having any problems. You can see the voltage is right down as well. I'll put it back down to 1.2. We're having a play there. We've got 4 gigahertz in total, 166.68, but it is 167 in there times 24. And that was actually stable. I didn't run the test for forever because I was just playing around with this, but I wanted to try and see how far I could push the base clock. And once I got the indicator that, all right, yeah, okay, I can get 167 and I can just enable that in the BIOS, fine, it then led me to push things a little bit further. So the furthest I managed to go, keeping things within, a decent kind of level, you can see I've knocked the multiplier back a little bit here, still at 1.2 volts. I managed to get 175 megahertz. Once I pushed past that 175 megahertz, it actually didn't matter whether I put the voltage up. I did try 180 at 1.3 volts, and I was just getting 0 on the LCD poster. So it's pretty much, that was an indicator for me that we'd found an upper limit of the base clock that was available. So then, what I then decided to do is go and try and find the best mix of the multiplier, the Uncore, the base clock, everything, and see the level that I could actually get to as a stable overclock. Okay, so our final overclock, although I have changed the Uncore ever so slightly since this screenshot, we ended up running an Uncore of 3.7 gigahertz. But we had 4.5 gigahertz on the CPU, just over 1.3 volts, and that was 35 times 128.72. That gave us a memory frequency of just over the 2800 megahertz. It was basically 2830, I think we ended up with a relatively good tie-in. And then our temperatures over here, as you can see, they've gone right up. We have one core on 84 degrees. The fact that it was just the one, it's always been that hot one. I wasn't too worried about it. But this was the best I've been able to achieve in quite a short amount of time, really. It will probably end up evolving as I start to learn the way that the chips, you know, respond to voltages. There's a lot of little bits and bobs. I could have really spent an entire week just playing and tweaking with this. But thanks to DHL messing me about and leaving my CPU on a shelf for over a week, it kind of really put me on the back foot. I have spoken to other media and stuff as well, and I do know that kind of 4.4 to 4.6 is a very good clock. 4.6 is like a dream chip with these from what I've been hearing. But this is just to give you a good indicator. So out the box, the temperatures are great, you know what I mean? But you're going to be looking at about 50 degrees with a good cooler, 60 degrees with a cheap one, really. But if you really want to rage the overclocks and have your uncore up, your memory up, you know, your base clock and everything up, and more importantly, once you start doing all those things, the voltage is going to increase drastically. So we've gone up from a volt pretty much up to 1.3. So that's like 0.3 of a voltage upwards that we've gone. That's a 30% increase in voltage. So we've done that, and the temperatures, as you can see, have actually pretty much gone up about 30 degrees. So if you're planning on getting one of these to overclock the bejesus out of it, even though the temperatures are much better, the IHS is obviously a lot better, you are still going to have to spend out on good cooling. But that's just normal overclocking procedure, really. But obviously it's my job to try and you know, educate you guys and let you know how these things are responding, because I think a lot of people are expecting these type of overclocks probably to have been a little bit higher and the temperatures to have been a little bit lower. But obviously the voltage difference is really where the killer factor comes in. So right, that's that side of it. We've done the benchmarks, you've seen the results we got. Apart from this, the uncore would have been 3.7 gigahertz. It was actually 3.75, but anyway, that was when we started running all of our benches. But in our graphs, we've got all of the results. So we've got everything kind of staggered together that you can see. So if you do want to go and have a look at all of them, you can go and have a look on the Overclock 3D website. But I'm going to show you a few graphs now just to give you an idea. And believe it or not, the cores have made a difference in gaming as well. Now I like Prime 95 because you've got a really quick test, which you blink and it's done. And then you've got a fairly lengthy test. Now, this is things have changed a lot. Now, you can see in our graphs, we've got the 4790K, which is obviously the latest quad core with hyper threading. We've got the 4770K, which is one below, but then we've also got quite a lot of other chips. If you have a look there, we've got the 4960X in both stock and overclock modes as well. And the lower the speed, the better, because it's calculating stuff. But up at the top, now this is where it might get a little bit confusing for you. I've shown you all the results. We've got the 5960X stock. We've got the 5960X with the memory set and then the uncore overclock. We've then got the 5960X with just the 2800 megahertz memory on its own. And then we've got the 5960X with everything kind of tailed in together. Now, the confusing thing here is the uncore overclock is a little bit slower than the just the 2800 megahertz overclock. So, you know, this could be at the point where I would then, if I had more time, I would have gone back to see if I'd pushed it maybe a little bit too far. Maybe I needed a few more volts. Or maybe it just doesn't necessarily utilize it that much, and by increasing the uncore overclock could end up slowing the benchmarks down. These are all things that I need to learn over the coming months. The most important thing here is, if you have a look at the 4970K, 187 seconds right at the bottom, and the big white long one. If you have a look at the 5960, it's half. Now I know it's twice the processor, but for twice the processor to get exactly half the speed is actually quite an achievement on Intel's standpoint. It was a pretty big eye-opener for me, really. And the W Prime benchmark is a free download. Just put Prime 95, download it into Google, go and find it, run your own one and compare it to this. So X264 Benchmark is essentially a media coding program. We use this because it's very similar to Handbrake, but it's actually easier for us to run, and a lot of people have started to utilize the X264 Benchmark now, mainly because the X264 codec is so widely used now. So the bigger the number, the better for this one, because it's a scoring aspect rather than a time aspect. So right at the bottom you can see that we've got the 4770K, and then you can see it going upwards with the CPUs. You get the 4790, obviously there was a core speed difference, it was 4.4, so that's why that's a little bit higher. The overclock above that, and then you go into the 4960X, the 5960X, and here you can see at the top that the graph is laid out how you would expect. Stock 5960X, then the memory. The Uncore did make a bit of a difference on this one, although only marginally with this benchmark. But then right at the top you can see there's quite a jump with that blue one and the white one, where we've gone for the whole package, where we've gone base clock, multiplier, memory, and everything is right there at the top. So it did make a significant difference there. That was all kind of based on the first pass, but again, like I said, you can see a 30-point difference there from what would be, a 3.5 gigahertz overclock up to a 4.5 gigahertz overclock, and that did make a hell of a difference on the scores. So moving on to the gaming. Now this is a kind of a twofold thing. A lot of people say that you don't get better results with games when you are running a higher processor. Now, one thing that we can see from this graph is you can see at the bottom we've got the quad cores with the hyper-threading, and then at the top you've pretty much got all of the big 6 and 8 core CPUs with the hyper-threading. Now, one of the interesting points is the difference between the 4960X and the 5960X isn't massive. I mean, you're going to get effectively 2 frames a second difference between a 4960X and the 5960X with an overclock. But what was more surprising for me more than anything was that there was still a hell of a difference between some of the newer ones, like the 4790 and then going up to the 5960. So it just goes to show that obviously you're going to have to consider price points here. The 4790K is probably going to be a third of the price of the 5960X. But you can see there that at least I'm concentrating on Tomb Raider more than anything, but Tomb Raider does definitely play a lot better. So this is again something that maybe we will look at in depth as time moves on, is that maybe we will do like a pretty much identical system as much as we possibly can do, but just do a processor shootout and see how much difference that it makes. Okay then peeps, so we're going to move on to a conclusion, and it pretty much writes itself. It's what we're going to do though is we're going to give it the performance award, and the reason why it kind of got marked down from gold to performance was the price. But the thing is that's not really a negative point. It's just something that we have to reflect in the award. But with something like this, you generally, you have to pay to get this level of stuff. Now, one thing I do need to kind of reiterate, and it's something that I do want to be very clear about, is there's going to be a lot of AMD fanboys out there now kind of going on about they've had an 8-core desktop product out for quite some time, and that that's something that you can't take away from AMD. They were the first to the market with that product. But it's not just about how many cores you've got. It's not just about the clock speed as well, because they've had that 5 gigahertz 8-core out for a little while. One of the things that you do always need to remember is that that processor could, for any intensive purposes, as far as this comparison is concerned, this bit that I'm trying to explain, it could be an Intel processor. It doesn't matter. The difference is the actual silicon itself and the way it's put together. It is about the architecture. It is about the transistors. It's about the way that stuff's built. So you could essentially say that the 8-core, that AMD do, that could be just an older Intel one in this argument. This is just blindingly quick, and the fact that it's blindingly quick yet doesn't necessarily use a massive amount of power either is just, it's bonkers. And it's testament to the way that Intel go about stuff. Yeah, all right, that people are going to go, oh yeah, it's 8 cores, but it blows fucking everything out of the water that's ever been around before. And it's now doing that with lower volts. It's actually pulling less power from the wall, even though we've got more cores. But this also then, and the reason why I wanted to cover that about architecture, and it's not all about core speed and stuff, is to bring us into what a lot of people are going to say is disappointing overclocking. You do need to remember that it's not just about that core speed. If you look at the graphs, they're it's just up there. We've got significant increases from even the last generation of stuff. Now the last generation, the 4960X for example, most of our benchmarks were being run at 4.8 gigahertz. But obviously now we've got the DDR4, we've got its Haswell E now, we've got those extra cores as well. You can see that there is a gap opening up there with that extra performance. Yes, you could say that it's just because of those extra cores. Until we get the 5930K and the 5820 reviews out, I'm not really going to be able to do any direct comparisons. But as far as this as being the top end product's concerned, it's beat everything that was out there. I've personally tested the 8 core Xeons in the past. I had 2.6 gigahertz one, and I had one that did about 3.4 gigahertz. And this, even at stock, it was beating those. That could be kind of driver implementations and the DDR4 and stuff, because obviously there's a lot of differences. But one of the critical points that we do need to kind of keep hammering home about is that overclocking as well. The base clock overclocking isn't of the levels that we were used to back with the 1366 stuff. But I've not seen anything go as high as 175 base on air cooling without massive volts for quite some time. Now, I don't know how this is going to pan out in the future. I really don't. And when we started adding the multipliers and stuff on, that 175 just wasn't stable and we had to knock it back. But I do live in hope that it's going to even more so separate what I will call the kind of extreme products, which is the 2011 socket, from the mainstream products, which is what we need to remember that they are. The mainstream gamer products is at the moment the Z97 stuff. So if you do end up buying the 2011 stuff and you want to get the most from it, you are going to need to be prepared to learn a lot, especially as a newcomer, a beginner, a noob, whatever you want to call yourself. There's a lot in the BIOS that you are going to have to get there and get your teeth into. These are going to be all things that I'm going to be covering in depth over the coming weeks and months. There's just an immense amount of work, and there's no point me putting 12 different videos up all on the day of launch, because you'll only watch one of them and you'll probably skip through a couple of the others. So we do have to stagger them. So another confusing thing that is going to, with a lot of people, is going to be those PCI Express lanes as well. If you end up getting the baby one at the bottom, the 5820, you do only get 28. So that I know we're reviewing the 40 lane ones, but it's things that we do need to kind of bring in. X99 obviously brings us a lot of new toys. We've got DDR4 for starters. With the memory starting at 2133, kind of says a lot really as well. There's already easily available memory. It's pre-listed in shops, even at the time of me filming this review, 3000 megahertz and 3200 megahertz, which you can enable with XMP as well. It's just a quick flick. Once you start tweaking those and playing around with those beyond the CPU running at stock is really when your BIOS knowledge is going to come into play. But there's an immense amount of toys and new things for us to learn. It's an exciting time to be an enthusiast. I'm certainly properly enthused about all this stuff, because it's new things for us to review. It puts me back at I haven't got a clue kind of thing. I'm having to sit here, taking notes, writing stuff out. So it's all, a great time for all of us. It's not just me, because I get sent this stuff and get to play with it. It's also a good time for you to be learning stuff, and hopefully by me doing my job, that will be how it will come across as well. So essentially, the 5960X is an 8-core, 16-thread monster chip. We've got all the nice new things, Pci Express, M.2, DDR4 memory, crazy bandwidth available with that DDR4 memory as well. The overclocking, the actual numbers for the overclocking aren't necessarily as high as people want it, because I know everyone just assumes that every new generation means the core speed has to go up as well. But the fact that we got 4.5 gigahertz at 1.3 volts essentially, temperatures were essentially below 80 degrees with a decent cooler as well. I didn't go overboard and start adding like gazillions of fans or anything on. So it's all easily tamed as well. And if you're willing to put the BIOS in, you can the time into the BIOS rather, you can see that you can get a humongous amount of extra performance out of it if at stock it wasn't enough. But anyway, yes, it's expensive, which is why we made it a performance award and not a gold award. But let's face it, if you're even looking at this review with a thought to buy it, you're not going to be caring about it, because you're going to pay that because you want an 8-core 16-thread product in your rig, and paying £800 to £1,000 on it, you know, it's not going to necessarily mean that much. It's definitely going to be a product that's probably going to favour video editors, 3D renderers, you know, the modelers, that type of aspect. Your gaming will, you know, find a good boost, especially if you're running multiple cards. Those extra PCI Express lanes and those extra cores will make a difference. But it's obviously it's the type of difference that you're going to be paying a lot of money for. So it's all down to you whether you're prepared to be spending this sort of stuff. There's always going to be people out there saying, "Oh, it's not worth $1,000 and then another 500 for memory and this and that." And those people are probably going to be the people that never would have bought it in the first place. And you're never going to get this product being 200 quid. It's not the way it is. So you do have to think about it kind of with a little bit more of an open mind than fixating on the price. But for those of you out there that are considering it and don't know whether they should or they shouldn't, I would just kind of go, can you really live without it? Can you? Is it the type of thing that you want just because it's, you know, the latest and greatest thing? And if you're one of those people that want it just because it's new, you want to play with it, I wouldn't say don't go and get it. I'm personally going to be jumping on this with my personal rig. I've actually been waiting for all this stuff to come out so that I can get involved and do a new Orca. So if that doesn't speak volumes to you, I don't know what will. So if you have to have the best possible gaming rig possible, yes, you should be buying it. If you want an overclocked rendering rig and don't want to be spending, let's face it, sometimes £500, £600, even £1,000 more for the Xeon variants, then yes, you should be buying it. And if you're an enthusiast and you can afford it, yes, you should be buying it. Even those of you that can't necessarily afford it, I'd almost be thinking, well, there's plenty of credit facilities out there now. If you can afford to pay it off, yes, you should be buying it. But dancing with my remote around all over the place, this is Tiny Tom Logan with his first of his 5960X/X99 videos out.